Cool. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. Today we're cooking a Japanese fried chicken dish called chicken katsu. Probably the more common version is called tonkatsu, which is a pork chop, but a similar dish but using pork chop instead of chicken. Today I'm going to be doing it with chicken breast because it's what I have, and I also kind of like chicken katsu more than I like tonkatsu. But they're essentially the same thing other than the use of meats or the type of meat that you find. So we're going to be taking a look at a couple of different things that go behind how a chicken katsu is made, including the panko breadcrumb and the fry method and a couple other things. Mostly what we're going to be taking a look at is like minimalism in recipe making and how that all kind of ticks and what kind of makes those things work. So we're going to take a look at all that stuff today. Today the recipe that we're following is a recipe that came out over on my YouTube channel last Friday, which popped up, last Friday, which kind of walks through some of the specifics behind this dish. So if you're trying to figure out how to make this particular dish yourself, that's a good place to check out because there's lots of fun recipes and new content popping up over there. Those recipes, they come out every Friday, so last Friday was the recipe for this chicken katsu. Friday before that we did Taiwanese popcorn chicken. Before that I think was a curry. I think we did Japanese curry. Something like that. So lots of fun content coming up over there, including new recipes every Friday. That's also where the concurrent live stream lives. So if you look behind me, there's another laptop streaming. That goes over to YouTube. And on that live stream, there's a whole schedule of everything that I'm going to be cooking. So if you were following along over on the YouTube channel, you probably would have known 2-3 weeks ago when that I would be cooking this today. Because that schedule goes out pretty far now. So if you haven't yet, definitely check out that YouTube channel. Lots of fun stuff going on over there. Cool. But back to our chicken katsu. So starting off, as with many things, I'm starting off by crushing and mincing some 4 cloves of garlic. And then next up is going to be a fine mince on about a tablespoon or 1 inch's worth of ginger. So ginger is hard to estimate because it kind of comes in weird shapes and sizes. But loosely saying, we're looking for about a tablespoon, and if you can't quite tell, it should be about 1 inch's worth. These often come up, especially in Chinese cooking. Actually, you'll find the use of ginger and garlic because they work really well as like fundamental layers of umami. We're actually not going to be using this in a stir fry today, though. What we're going to be using this for today is actually going to be going into our katsu sauce. So we're going to be making our tonkatsu sauce out from scratch. So to make that kind of tick and work, what we're going to be doing is blooming out the aromatic flavors from our garlic and ginger. And then we're going to drop it into our tonkatsu sauce. And that's kind of going to kind of give us that like really aromatic qualities of our katsu sauce. So we're going to take a look at that. And that's going to come up right at the end, I think. So unlike a lot of the Chinese dishes that we usually use these elements of garlic and ginger, usually this ends up as a part of the stir fry, so usually comes up very early. In this case, we're actually not going to use it in the stir fry. We're going to be dropping it into our katsu sauce instead, and sort of using it to infuse those flavors into our katsu sauce. And in my opinion, kind of makes for like a really interesting and like unique flavored katsu sauce that you probably won't be able to replicate or won't find from like the store-bought stuff. So I'm just doing a fine mince on both of these. Actually, mostly just the fine mince is important on our ginger. The garlic, you'll notice that I actually didn't do too much. We just crushed it and then I set it aside for our ginger. That's our fine mince. Ginger tea, yeah, I love ginger tea. Usually really good for you when you're sick. I'm not actually sure why it's so good for you when you're sick, but I always drink ginger tea when I'm sick. And it usually comes in honey. So these like a really interesting concoction of, I believe it's Chinese, and it's ginger with ginseng, and I think it's coated in honey, and you can make a tea out of it, and that's the tea that I always drink when I'm sick. So, or at least that's the tea that my mom always makes when I'm sick. So, I don't know why or if it actually does help you when you're sick, but I know that it's the one that I've had all the time when I'm sick. So, Hermina, yeah, happy Monday. How's it going? Cool. So next up, moving on, we're getting to our green onions next. Yeah, giving these a wash. So very, very often you will see me separating my green onions because I usually like to set aside the whites of our green onions for a stir fry, and we kind of like to use them as aromatic elements because they're a little bit more durable and like thicker. In this particular case, though, we're not actually going to be doing any stir fry, so there won't be any real use for those whites as a aromatic element. So what we're going to do is dice all of these green onions up, or slice all of these green onions up as our garnish. So we're going to be using the entire thing for our garnish. So what's really tricky about doing that, though, is that if you are going to be using the whites of your green onions as a garnish, which you totally can do, you have to chop it slightly differently, because if you chop it too thick, it will be very, very pungent, and it will be essentially the equivalent of trying to eat a raw onion. So we don't want these to be too large, otherwise you're definitely going to get like a very overpowering flavor of onion. So what I'm doing is I'm chopping these, or I'm slicing, usually using a back slice, and then slicing these very, very thin, or as thin as you can possibly get them. So this kind of requires a little bit of good knife technique, but if you can manage, we want these to be pretty razor thin. Which is, in my opinion, this is probably the most important use of a back slice here. You don't always have to use a back slice if you're not super worried about destroying the cell structures of your green onions. But if you are trying to get these things super, super thin, I think the only way of doing that is with a back slice. Otherwise, you're going to just kind of obliterate your green onions. So that's the whites, and then we're going to do the same thing with our greens, but we don't need to be as careful about making sure they're super, super thin, because greens are not quite as thick and oniony. So here's our greens. We're going to do something pretty similar. We're still going to cut it on a bias, but I'm not going to be as careful about making sure they're super, super thin. So same thing, I'm cutting on a diagonal, and then I'm just pulling my knife backwards instead of pushing. So in a push cut, we would push downward like this. In a back slice, we're pulling back on the knife in the opposite direction, and that kind of gives us a more gentle slice that won't kind of destroy the cell structures of your green onions. So if you use a back slice with things that are super, super delicate, like green onions, for example, you can avoid like shredding it to pieces. So very, very often, if you push downward on your knife, like you would normally do with, say, like chicken, I guess, or cabbage, which we're going to be doing next. What will happen is, in that motion of pushing downward on that knife, you're going to start fracturing the cell structures of those green onions. Since they're so delicate, what will happen is you will end up with a lot of broken green onion on your cutting board, and then you're going to have less green onion in your actual onion. So I'm setting this aside. This is going to be for our garnish very, very last. And next up, we're going to get to our cabbage. So I have a very small amount of cabbage. I think this is maybe less than a quarter of a head. The cabbage is a very interesting use of cabbage in this particular instance of chicken katsu, mainly because we're not actually going to be eating it. This cabbage is not actually for eating. It's mostly just for garnish, but what we're really going to be using it for is we're going to lay down a bed of cabbage underneath our fried chicken. So it's going to be super, super important. Even though we're not eating it, it is really, really important because without this cabbage, what will happen is that fried chicken is going to get really, really soggy, and then you're going to have like a really, really mushy piece of fried chicken. So the cabbage is really important to make sure that this chicken doesn't sort of like fall apart on the plate. So I'm just slicing this super, super thin, or as thin as I can get it. If you want, you can probably can grate it. And that ought to do it. So this is going to go onto our plate very, very first. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set the chicken on top of this cabbage, and that's going to give us a nice landing place so that we don't end up with soggy fried chicken. Oh yeah, any particular reason why for flavor or just visual? For the green onions, probably for the green onions. Yeah, so Hermina, good question. I like chopping the green onions on a bias because it kind of creates a larger piece of green onion. So if you could take a look, this is what it looks like when you do it correctly. As we have these like large diagonal bits of green onion. So if you look super close, you can see they're really, really wide, but also really, really thin. So it achieves a couple of things. So if we had chopped this straight, you would have like a pretty narrow, like kind of circular piece of green onion. So I like cutting when I chop green onions for garnishes. I love doing it on a bias because it holds more like physical presence. So super, super often if you cut those things too small, you just won't find it at all. It will basically just it'll disappear, especially in like really ingredient heavy dishes. So like for example in a fried rice, for example, I use green onions as a garnish in fried rice all the time. What will happen is like once you start like digging into that bowl, those green onions, they're just going to get buried and they'll get lost completely. So it'll look nice because there'll be a nice pop of color, but eventually it will just kind of get lost in the swamp of your fried rice. But if you cut it on a bias, it'll be a little bit larger, and you'll be able to like find it when you dig in. So I love doing that just so that there's a little bit more physical presence for those things. Otherwise, you end up losing it. Good question, though. All right, so that's our cabbage. I'm going to set this aside, and this is going to come in very last when we start plating up. All right, what else do we got? Let's do this lemon first. I'm just slicing up some lemon wedges next. Nothing super complicated here. And these, again, are going to be our final garnish. The very last thing that I'm going to slice up is a pickled daikon. So I will show you. I'm not actually going to cut all of this. So pickled daikon or pickled radish, you could see it in a couple of different ways. What it is essentially is a pickled turnip, and it looks very strange because it is bright yellow, kind of looks like this. You will see it a lot in like Korean and Japanese markets. It comes up in both cuisines very, very often. And it reminds me a lot of is like a buttered pickle, so it's like, or like a bread and butter pickle, where it's like pickled, but it's also very, very sweet. There's a lot of sugar content in these things, just like in a bread and butter pickle. So these work really, really well as garnishes. There are a number of different things that you can garnish chicken katsu with, but I love siding it with a little bit of something pickled because it kind of cuts through the like heavy greasiness of a fried chicken. So I'm gonna chop these. We're going pretty thin here. We also don't need a lot of them because they are pickles. So chop in moderation, but kind of again depends on how much you like them. So that's pickled daikon. Pickled daikon, if you've ever been to like a Korean restaurant or if you've ever had like Korean barbecue, is one of those things that you'll find in a lot of Korean food, a lot of Japanese food. It's a very, very common garnish. And it's just generally because it has so much sugar and sweetness to it. It just works really well. Right. Let's see. Last up, I'm going to set up my tonkatsu sauce, or katsu sauce. What we're gonna do a couple of different things here. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is set up the sauce itself. So what we're gonna do is build a pretty thick and pretty sweet sauce. So we're gonna be using a couple of things, some of which come from Japanese cooking. Most of it just comes from like pan Asian cooking. So we're gonna be using, today we're using some black vinegar and mirin and also dark soy sauce. All of which have quite a bit of sugar. And I also think the most important ingredient to tonkatsu or katsu sauce is actually ketchup. You can't make katsu sauce without ketchup. So we're going to build out the sauce first, and then what we're going to do is take our aromatics, which are our garlic and ginger, and then what we're going to do is drop this in a wok for maybe 10-15 seconds, the same way that we would if we were doing a stir fry. And then we're going to bloom out all of those aromatics and then drop them into our sauce itself. And what that's going to do is like infuse the sauce with some of those aromatic qualities. So very, very useful. And also something that I do quite often in a lot of different sauces because it's a nice way to build out like a really interesting and complex sauce. All right. First up, that should be 2 tablespoons of soy sauce. I just add a little bit too much soy sauce. And then, let's see. Next up is a single tablespoon of dark soy sauce. Dark soy sauce, it's not very similar to regular soy sauce, so if you're trying to find a good sub, dark soy sauce is a little bit thicker and a lot sweeter than regular soy sauce. So if you can't find it, you can totally just use regular soy sauce, but I would add a little bit of brown sugar to compensate for that lack of sweetness. Next up is some black vinegar, which just like dark soy sauce, is a little bit sweeter than regular old rice vinegar. And then, again, this is a single tablespoon of mirin. Mirin comes from Japanese cooking and is made from the fermentation of rice wine, so it is very, very sweet, also has a lot of sugar. You will notice almost everything that we're adding right now has quite a bit of sugar in it, so we're going for a pretty sweet sauce because that is like kind of the general flavor of katsu sauce, is that it's like very sweet. Right. Next up, this is a single tablespoon of oyster sauce. It's going to give us a bit of fishy fermentation. Last up is a bit of ketchup, and I promise you can't make katsu sauce without ketchup. I know that it's pretty lowbrow, but I promise that it is absolutely the single most important ingredient in this katsu sauce is ketchup. You can't do it without it, I promise. I tested this, by the way, when I was working on this recipe. I tested so many different things out, tried to try and not use ketchup. I tried like tomato paste, I tried tomato sauce, I just tried tomato at one point. At one point I think I tested out corn syrup. But all of them, they don't quite work. They're not going to give you that quality of katsu sauce that you're looking for, where it's like bottled sweetness. So like that quality that you mostly would associate with ketchup, but like really, really like store-bought ketchup, so like Heinz 57 ketchup. That quality that you taste when you eat katsu sauce, it comes from the ketchup, so it has to be, it's got to be ketchup. Yeah. Aromatic is a legitimate cooking term, yeah. The reason that I use that so often is because it's part of like the fundamentals of wok frying is aromatic. So very, very specifically when I'm speaking about aromatics, it's usually these 2 ingredients. It's usually garlic and ginger. Because that's really the only qualities that you really get out of garlic and ginger when you use it in a wok fry, is you're blooming out the aromatic qualities of it, so the smell and the fragrance of garlic and ginger. When you add it really, really early to a wok fry, that's where it comes from. Yeah, RKK6, how's it going? Yeah, cool. Yeah, totally, yeah, ketchup and Worcestershire sauce. That comes up a lot. I've heard a lot of folks say that you can make katsu sauce with Worcester sauce. Worcestershire. Cool. Is dark soy sauce the same as hoisin sauce? Probably similar. I would say that's probably the most similar thing that I can think of. But no, they're not the same at all. Hoisin sauce also very, very sweet. And like when I think of hoisin sauce, I think of it's like the ketchup of Chinese food, because it's like very, very sweet, has like some amounts of fermentation, so it kind of reminds me of soy sauce a little bit, but mostly it's just very, very sweet in the way that ketchup is sweet. But hoisin sauce is also a lot thicker, and in my opinion, probably even more sweet than dark soy sauce. So, yeah, cool. Yeah, I mean, yeah, ketchup for sure. Yeah, that fake chowder, good username. That's another thing that I've heard quite a bit, is the use of mustard, but specifically, so not just any mustard, so definitely not like plain old yellow mustard. It has to be very specifically Dijon mustard. And I cannot find Dijon mustard right now, or maybe I just don't have it. I definitely don't have any. And while I was working on this recipe, I didn't have any Dijon mustard, so no mustard today. But definitely, very, very common is the use of Dijon mustard. The more that I researched this particular katsu sauce, the more I discovered that lots of folks use mustard, ketchup and mustard super often. Cool. So that's our katsu sauce, by the way. There's only two very important elements that are missing from our katsu sauce right now, and that is going to be our garlic and ginger. So once we finish deep frying, so you'll notice over on the stove, my wok has fryer oil in it right now. So once we finish deep frying, we're going to remove that fryer oil, then bloom out these aromatics, and then add them back to our katsu sauce at the very, very end. Yeah. Cool. So next up, before we get to that, we're going to get to our chicken. So I've seen differing opinions about katsu, or chicken katsu, and what type of chicken that you can use. I've seen some folks say that you can make chicken katsu with either chicken thigh or chicken breast. I'm personally of the opinion that you cannot make chicken katsu with chicken thigh. Specifically for the reason that if you want this size or like the style and shape of chicken katsu, which is like that cutlet style, it only comes very specifically from when you butterfly open a piece of chicken thigh, or chicken breast. So if you do it with chicken thigh, you could, I'm sure it will taste fine, but it's not going to look correct. It's gonna look like a piece of chicken thigh. So, but when you look at a piece of chicken katsu, what it looks like is the shape and size of a piece of chicken breast that has been butterflied open, which happens when you slice it like so. So what we're doing is cutting down the center of our chicken breast very carefully. Also, you need a pretty sharp knife in order for this to work. We're being very careful for a couple of reasons, because the main thing that we don't want to happen is we don't want to split the chicken breast open. So if you're not careful, what will happen is, so there's a little bit of a thin point right here, is you can break it open, and then you're going to have one of your chicken cutlets is going to slice open. So, but if you do it correctly, it should look something like this. So we have this nice cut open piece of chicken, and it should be pretty flat. This is not what we wanted. So this is what I'm trying to avoid happening, which happens all the time. So if it happens, it happens. But at this point, it's all about presentation here. We're just trying to make sure that we have this nice, cohesive, but also thin piece of chicken breast. So I have seen other folks talk about using a meat mallet at this point, and you can flatten the piece of chicken breast. I'm of the opinion that you actually, number one, don't need to do that, but also number two, what you're going to end up doing is kind of messing up this, like the shape and structure of the chicken breast, and then you're going to have ugly chicken katsu. So that's our chicken breast. We have 4 here, so what we're doing is making 4 pieces of chicken katsu. All right, so I'm setting these aside, and then what we're going to get to next is our panko breadcrumb batter. Yeah. Oh crap, that's a lot of watchers. How's it going, everyone? Nice watch, thank you. All right. So next up, we're getting to our chicken panko breadcrumb here. And if we're paying attention, clean the cutting board first. All right. Yeah, oh, you like the watch? Yeah, it's a Casio. I think someone pointed out that I don't actually know the make and model. I picked it up at a thrift shop. I think I got it at a thrift shop. I'm pretty sure it's vintage. If it's not vintage, then I found it used for sure. Yeah. Key influence. Yeah. Oh, good question. Yeah. What type of camera do I use? It's a Canon T6. I actually just upgraded the Canon camera. So this the cutting board camera is a Canon T6, and then over on the stove is my iPhone. So this one the one going to Reddit is another Canon actually. I think it's a Canon Vixia, and then the one on YouTube is an iPhone. It's a plain old iPhone. Cool. So let's see. I'm setting up my panko breading station next. What we need here are 3 different bowls, so we're going to get flour, some panko, and finally some egg. So here, starting off, is our egg. And then followed by what we need is, this is going to be half a cup of flour. And then finally, for our panko, what we're ultimately going to end up using is about an entire cup, little over a cup's worth of panko breadcrumb. But very, very important is that I'm not going to add all of it to the bowl at once. I'm only going to add about quarter cup at a time. Because if we add too much at a time, what's essentially going to happen is that as soon as we add the chicken to this panko, everything that's in the bowl is going to stick to the piece of chicken. So if we were to add an entire cup of panko to this bowl at once, what would happen is an entire cup is going to stick to the first cutlet because it's going to be very, very adhesive. So in order to make sure that we don't overbread it, we want to start by adding that breading quarter cup at a time to make sure that we don't end up with too much panko on a single piece of chicken. Cool. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Hello, everyone just joining. I just noticed there's so many folks on the stream right now. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, I know there's probably lots of folks this first time catching one of these streams. We're here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST. Mostly cooking recipes that come from my YouTube channel. So if you're watching on Reddit, that's the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. Every Friday over on that YouTube channel, there's a brand new recipe. So last Friday is actually the recipe for this chicken katsu. And I think this particular chicken katsu is part of a recipe hack series that we've been doing where we've been breaking down a lot of the recipes that come from the San Francisco Bay Area restaurant scene. So this one comes from a restaurant in Oakland called Shogun. If you haven't checked out that series, there's lots of fun stuff going on over there. There's another whole series that's dedicated to just reproducing foods from Chinese American classics. So we've been doing a lot of stuff from places like P.F. Chang's, Panda Express, things like that, kind of taking a look at some of those really, really classic and iconic dishes that are like specifically very, very Americanized classics. And then sort of taking a look at what it would look like if we were to try and reproduce some of those dishes in the lens of like traditional Chinese cooking. So like what does it look like if we do, say like honey sesame chicken, that's probably one of my favorites, and kind of deconstruct that stuff and try and see what it looks like if we were to do it in like a traditional Chinese wok fry, which is very interesting with some of that stuff because most Chinese American food that we know doesn't come from Chinese cuisine. It's not Chinese at all. It's pretty much just American cuisine. So stuff like that all lives over on the YouTube channel. So if you're interested in content like that, definitely hop over to YouTube, check out what's going on over there. That includes the recipe for this particular dish. Ooh, buzzing mic again. All right. Yeah, better? Okay, cool. Yeah, let me know if the mic is crapping out. Cool, so that's our fried chicken, or that's our chicken. What I just did was coated it in a little bit of flour to start. And then next up is going to be our egg wash, followed by our panko breadcrumbs. So we're gonna do this one step at a time. So our egg wash first, followed by our panko. Normally I would be a big proponent of the use of the wet hand, dry hand technique, in which we use our left hand for the egg wash and our right hand for the panko, so that we don't end up with hands that look like this, where a bunch of stuff just sort of sticks to it. But in this case, I actually don't think it's going to make a difference. I think both of our hands are just going to get covered in panko, and that's just going to be it. So, cool. Yeah, okay, cool, yeah, so the mic is all better. Charlie, yeah, how's it going? Hello to everyone over on YouTube. What's my favorite international cuisine? Ooh, I just forgot to do this. That kind of goes back and forth. Definitely, like, my favorite, like, comfort food is, for sure, Chinese food. So, like, Taiwanese food in particular is probably one of my favorites. Lately, I've been really into... I don't know, I kind of go all over the place. Lately, I've been pretty into Cambodian food, or like Laotian food, which I have not yet tried to reproduce at all. Cambodian and Laotian food is kind of similar to Thai food. I guess that would be like the most like closely related American equivalent. But it looks pretty different though. Like the dishes that you find from it look pretty different. All right. Yeah, good question though, yeah. Probably the thing that I cook most often is going to be Chinese food, for sure. Chinese or like Taiwanese food. Generally like Taiwanese leaning stuff. Alright, so I'm pushing pretty firmly on my chicken breast to make sure that this panko sticks. And then adding a little bit more at a time. What we're trying to make sure is that we don't overbread our chicken. And that should do it. So you'll notice, you can even see it now when I pick up this piece of chicken. That was almost a quarter cup of panko, and the whole thing kind of just picks up. So super important when you're doing chicken katsu. Don't just dump a whole cup of panko into that bowl, because you're going to have a single piece of chicken fillet with a whole quarter cup or a whole cup of panko on it. It's not fun. Oh, how do I feel about Indian food? That's a good question, yeah. I love Indian food. I don't eat it super often because it's super heavy. I have been experimenting with cooking Indian food, but it's really tricky because it uses a bunch of techniques that I'm not super familiar with. But yeah, I love eating it. I've been working on a chicken tikka masala dish for a long time. Have messed it up. I've messed it up at least 5 or 6 times, and at one point I just stopped trying because I kept messing it up. Tikka masala is very tricky because it has a yogurt coating to it, which makes it very difficult because if you don't do it correctly, the yogurt ends up in the sauce, and that's going to break the sauce if you let that yogurt kind of float into the sauce, which the sauce is supposed to be creamy, and that's where like probably dairy is involved. But if there's too much yogurt that's still stuck to the chicken, it ends up breaking, and then you have flakes of yogurt stuck in your sauce, which is not attractive. Cool. Oh, you didn't realize overbreading was a thing? Yeah, it's definitely a thing. It also could be a thing that you like. If you like your fried chicken a little bit breadier, definitely go for it. So this is definitely a judgment call at this point. Oops, that's not correct. All right. Figure out why I'm missing the camera. There we go. So I just started the fire under my fryer oil. We want that pretty hot before we start cooking in it. Definitely what we're looking for is 350 F, so we want 350 degrees Fahrenheit. What I usually like to do is shoot for 375 because as soon as we add a piece of fried chicken to our fryer oil, a couple of things are going to happen, but the main thing that happens when you add your first piece of chicken is that the temperature drops because your chicken is cold, the fryer oil is very hot. So the first thing that happens, you're probably going to lose about 20-25 degrees of temperature in your fryer oil as soon as you add something to it. So what I like doing is shooting for 375 and then keeping it, making sure that that fryer oil stays above 350, and that just makes sure that you don't undercook the chicken. But definitely, as soon as you heat that oil up, you want to account for the fact that the fryer is going to drop in temperature as soon as you add something to it. Cool. Yeah, only in California, yeah, very true, sir. Cool. Yeah, good question. Delaware smash. Yeah, thank you. It's bad luck. I don't know how to explain that, but it seems like every time that I hit top broadcast, I have some sort of weird technical difficulty that involves either the mic or a camera or both. Today, both. Who knows? I don't know. Yeah, I used to do live stream, or I used to live loop beats on Reddit. I haven't done that in a while, but last time that I tried, I hit the top broadcast and then I messed up the loop. And when you mess up a live loop, you have to stop and start over again. So that was like the pinnacle of choking on live stream. What temperature for medium rare? Good question. A medium rare in a steak would be, I believe, 135 internal temperature. You don't want to go for medium with a piece of chicken. Chicken has to be cooked all the way through, so you can't go medium rare on chicken. So we're looking for if with the chicken it's always going to be 165 F internal temperature. Because chicken has a quality about it is if you undercook it, unlike steak, if you undercook steak, it will just be really tender. It's still totally edible. But if you undercook chicken, you can actually get sick from that. So in order to make sure that we kill off bacteria that's like E. coli, for example, we have to make sure that the internal temperature hits a minimum low point or minimum high low point, which would be 165 F. Sometimes I like to stretch it and go for like 150-ish. Sometimes I dip as low as like 145 and it's probably okay. But if you're trying to be safe, 165. Yeah, medium rare chicken. Yeah, good, exactly. Oh yeah, it's a hell of a username. How can I fry without your kitchen becoming sticky? You can't. You have to clean a lot. So I scrub my kitchen every day. So after every stream, especially if I've wok fried, probably the only time where I don't have to clean the kitchen is if I'm not stir frying. So if I'm making a soup, I don't have to clean the kitchen. But otherwise, pretty much scrubbing every day. So you have to clean a couple of things. Main thing that you have to clean is this overhead. And then the underside of the overhead, but also you kind of have to scrub the cabinets all the time. And then probably the next best thing that I can recommend is just make sure your windows are open, and that kind of gets the smoke out. But the more that you cook, the more stuff just kind of gets coated in oil, and then you kind of just have to clean everything. So the number one thing that I do in order to like reduce the amount of stuff that I have to clean is just make sure that as much stuff as possible is put away. You always like your chicken with some pink in the middle. Yeah, I mean, yeah, totally. Cool. All right, so my fryer oil is at 200. We're waiting for 350, probably 375 before we start going. Cool. Yeah. Cool. While we wait for that, I'll introduce myself one more time. Hello, everyone just joining. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. Today we're doing a Japanese fried chicken called chicken katsu. If you've ever had fried meat at all in Japanese cuisine, it's probably some sort of katsu. Probably the more common fried meat dish that you would come across is tonkatsu, which is the same thing but using pork cutlet. Pork chop? I think it uses pork chop. It's very similar. It's almost the exact same thing, except that instead of using chicken breasts, which we're doing today, you would normally use pork cutlet instead. Otherwise, though, it's very, very similar, and actually my preference is the use of chicken breast because it ends up being a little bit more tender. Pork cutlet, the pork tonkatsu, it tends to be a little bit more chewy. Also very good, but can go either way. This particular version of chicken katsu is part of a recipe series that I've been doing over my YouTube channel. So if you're watching on Reddit, there's a YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. That's where the recipe lives. So every Friday we got new recipes coming out. This particular one came out last Friday, so that all lives over on the YouTube channel. So if you're trying to figure out how to cook the things that I'm cooking, it's a good place to be. There's also a concurrent live stream that lives behind me. On that live stream, there's a whole schedule of everything that I'm going to be cooking. So if you want to know what I'm going to be cooking next, I think that schedule is now going out like almost 4 weeks now, two to 3 weeks at least. I think sometimes it goes out as far as 4 weeks. So if you want to find that stuff out, all lives over there. So cool. Yeah, tonkatsu is tonkatsu is one of probably my second favorite after chicken katsu. For no real reason other than I think I just prefer chicken breast more. Alright. Cool. What's the one kitchen appliance you think most people don't have that they should? I think most people probably don't have a wok. Probably like unless you cook wok cooking a lot. Probably the one kitchen appliance most people don't have is a wok. So I would say if you don't own a wok, definitely get yourself a good wok. But other than that, anything that's carbon steel or cast iron, I think those are two elements that lots and lots of people don't have in their kitchen. Generally in favor, at least here in the States, I generally see people favor more towards Teflon nonstick because it's like more user friendly and like lower bar for entry. So you can get a Teflon nonstick and you can cook on it immediately. A good solid cast iron skillet will last you literally forever. Like I've used cast iron skillets that were made in the 1800s. Like literally they last forever. Whereas a Teflon nonstick pan only lasts for about 3 months or so, depending on how long you cook on it. And then after that, the Teflon just starts wearing out, and eventually there won't be a Teflon coating anymore. And then it's basically useless. Once your Teflon pan doesn't have a Teflon coating on it anymore, you can't really cook on it. So yeah, if there's one like good piece of kitchen appliance that I think lots of people don't have, it's a good solid cast iron skillet or a good solid carbon steel pan or wok. Almost there. 300. We're looking for another 75 degrees. I probably should have started heating this up before we we're ready to cook. Sarah, yeah. Keep pouring the panko. Yeah, leave the extra scriptsy. Yeah, yeah. It depends. I go either way. Today I'm going a little bit light on the panko for a couple of reasons. Mainly the reason that I'm going lighter on the panko today is because I'm planning on using the leftover of this chicken katsu to make katsu donburi, which is like a leftover katsu dish that's like I guess it's like a rice bowl. It's like chicken katsu or katsu that's like cooked in egg and then like done in a rice bowl, which is actually the real reason why I was doing chicken katsu is because I wanted to do katsu donburi. So that's what the recipe that I'm going to be working on next is going to be katsu donburi, which you can only do with leftover chicken katsu. So that's why I'm making so many. Yeah. Stardust Shelby, yeah, how's it going? Hello, everyone. Yeah, and Bachfriend T, that's a good username. And yeah, you're basically eating all of that Teflon. That's essentially what's happening, is leaching into your cooking. It's also like Teflon not so great for like high heat cooking. So yeah, it's just like I have owned probably over a couple dozen Teflon nonstick pans at this point in like the last 15, 20 years that I've been cooking. And every 5-6 months I have to throw it out. So it's like super frustrating. And just like really just contributes to disposable culture. That it's just so frustrating. And since I have a cast iron skillet, it took me maybe 5 or 6 cooks before it really started having a non-stick coating. But ever since then, it's the only skillet that I cook on. I don't use any other skillet. I have one other small stainless steel copper bottom skillet that I do like small stuff for and like dry toasting, but that's about it. Almost there. 340. Yeah. Digital thermometers. Yeah, that's someone asked about digital thermometers the other day too. One of the big downsides of a big old Candy thermometer like the one that I'm using is that it has a lot of steel. So you can kind of see it on Reddit. You can definitely see it on YouTube because of the camera angle. But there's a whole bunch of metal that's involved in that thermometer. And part of what's a problem with that is that it leaches off some of the flavor. So you get a little bit of a metallic taste from that thermometer. Not my favorite quality about it, but I also think, number one, that it's very, very important to have a good idea of what temperature your fryer oil is at all times. And number two is I've broken so many digital thermometers. I think like 5 or 6 at this point, and they've melted, they've just straight up broken. I have thrown out so many thermometers that I've just gone back to analog, and I'm not going back to digital anymore. I'm just so frustrated with it. All right, we're at 350. I'm gonna give it that a little bit of headroom, and then we can start frying. Ooh, ceramic, yeah, ceramic's good. Ceramic's kind of expensive, I think. The only ceramic the only ceramic cookware I own is my Dutch oven, which has a ceramic coating, or ceramic enamel. Not sure. I think that's ceramic. But yeah, definitely expensive and really delicate too. You could definitely break that stuff if you're not careful. All right, 360. That's close enough. So very, very carefully lay that into the oil. Probably use tongs if you're worried. I'm probably gonna start using tongs. And then what I like doing is giving this 3 to 5 minutes on the first side, probably about 4 minutes on the first side. And then flipping, super, super important, especially if you're frying in a wok, is give that thing a flip, and that's gonna give you a nice even cook. Yeah, Stardust Shelby, yeah, good question. Today we're making a Japanese chicken katsu. It comes from a recipe that came out over on my YouTube channel last Friday. So lots of folks, I know that lots of folks have been following this Reddit channel from gift recipes, which actually I think this recipe came up on gift recipe a day ago, maybe yesterday or 2 days ago, I forget. But before those things end up on gift recipe, they're always over on my YouTube channel, probably a couple days before they're on gift recipe. And they're always a lot longer too. So the YouTube version, it kind of usually runs about 8-10 minutes long. We usually take some time to kind of talk through some of the decision making that goes behind these recipes. So if you're following those gift recipes, definitely check out that YouTube version because they're a little bit more thorough. All right, so my fryer's going. We have some nice bubbling. It's starting to get a little bit golden. We want to give that at least 3 minutes aside before we flip it. Most importantly though, we're keeping a close eye on our fryer oil. We're sitting pretty solid at 360, so I'm going to start turning the temperature down. But I'm keeping a close eye on that, and we're making sure mainly that this fryer oil doesn't dip below 375 or 350. If it dips any lower than that, we're going to start undercooking the chicken, so we're going to have trouble getting a good internal temperature. Ceramic pretty much like Teflon. Oh, with the aluminum core, yeah. You won't be able to see the crack. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. One metal that I have been toying around with is iodized aluminum. Which I haven't quite passed judgment on. My parents own a good iodized aluminum wok, and mostly I just find that it sticks a lot. So it might be just because I'm not using it properly. All right, we're at 2 minutes. A little under 2 minutes. I'm gonna start flipping. I'm flipping it mostly because I just noticed that the bottom side is starting to brown a lot quicker. So I'm giving that a flip and turning down my fryer oil a little bit. This is a little bit hotter than I'd like. Hermina, do you need a slurry? No, good question. Yeah, no, Hermina, this might be one of the first things in a while we're cooking that doesn't call for a cornstarch slurry. So there's actually no sauces involved. That's part of one of my favorite things about Japanese chicken katsu is that it's a very, very minimal dish. There's not any stir fry. It's basically a plate lunch. So the only source of sauce is going to come from our katsu sauce. So in this case, no cornstarch at all. Yeah. Cool. All right, I'm pulling out my piece of fried chicken because it's getting a little bit dark. And we're checking the internal temperature. So, like I mentioned earlier, there's no such thing as rare or medium rare fried chicken. There's only one temperature that we're looking for, and it's 165 internal, which is, yeah. There we go. Okay, so that's our first piece. I'm noticing, so there's a couple things that we could take a look at real quick. The main thing that I'm noticing is that our chicken is a little bit dark, so the breading started getting a little bit darker than I would like, and that's probably because the fryer oil was a little bit hotter than I want it to be. So for our next piece of fried chicken, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to get this temperature down a little bit. So we're creeping up to, that was hitting like 380 and climbing, so I'm going to turn the temperature down. Let our fryer oil cool down a little bit, get closer to 350, and that will avoid as much darkening. While that cools down, though, the other very important thing that we want to do, so there's a reason why we're cooking the chicken first, and that's because the chicken has to rest. So before we slice into it, super important, is let it rest first. So it needs to rest for at least 5-10 minutes and let that coating sort of like solidify. If you cut into it too early, that panko is just going to crumble off, and then you're going to have panko all over the place. So we're going to cool down that fried chicken before we cut into it. All right. My second piece of chicken going in next. Is it peanut oil? Skelly, Skelly, maybe. Today we're using, for the fryer oil, I think I'm just using straight up canola oil. I think this is pretty much just straight up canola oil. I take that back, it's vegetable oil. When I use fryer oil, I just look for whatever's the cheapest thing that has high smoke point, and that's just because you have to change it so often. So I just get the cheapest stuff. So today I'm using Mazola vegetable oil, which is generally stuff that I would probably not try and cook on, because in my opinion, when Mazola gets too hot, it starts tasting funny, and then you have like a weird like burnt flavor to that oil. Whereas if you use something like grapeseed, especially like organic grapeseed, it doesn't give that weird flavor and stays a little bit more neutral. With fryer oil, I very often will just go for whatever's the absolute cheapest. So I think I've got, this is a quart of Mazola oil or vegetable oil, and I think I got it for like $3 or $4. And that's just because I have to change the fryer oil so often that I don't like spending huge amounts of money on the fryer oil. But yeah, as for peanut oil, though, I cook in peanut oil all the time. But I usually reserve that for stir fries, and like anywhere where I'm actually gonna taste it. So I like using peanut oil where I'm actually gonna taste it. But in a fry like this, I think it's fine to just use something cheap. Yeah, Delaware Sun. Yeah, yeah. That's funny that you remember that. Yeah. Normally I do use cook with peanut oil, but actually. I really should go pick up more peanut oil. I don't know why I haven't picked up more peanut oil yet. But yeah, I recently ran out of peanut oil, so today I'm using grapeseed oil, which also works fine. But definitely, if you're like in the market for trying to figure out what kind of cooking oils to keep at home, peanut oil, it's a good one to keep at home if you do a lot of wok cooking. If you don't do a lot of wok cooking, or if you're only going to keep one kind of high heat oil in your kitchen, probably shouldn't be peanut oil because it's not neutral. Peanut oil leans very heavily, as the name implies, towards the flavor of peanuts. So that works really well for wok fries because it's nice to incorporate that little hint of peanut in a lot of mostly like Chinese dishes. If you incorporate a little bit of that, works really well, especially in stir fries and stuff, especially in Thai food for sure, because there's so much peanut quality. But when you start using it for anything that's not a wok fry, so I like the number one thing that I ran into is I tried using peanut oil for hash browns once, and it made the hash browns taste like peanut, which is not great. You don't want your hash browns tasting like peanut. So I'd say if you're gonna keep peanut oil in the house, you also have to keep something else. So probably canola oil, vegetable oil. I usually have peanut oil and grapeseed oil. So I would say if you're only gonna have one kind of oil, it should be something high heat and neutral. So grapeseed, vegetable, canola oil, all of those are very, very neutral. The second oil that I would say, in my opinion, the next thing that I keep in the house, because I use it so often, is peanut oil. But also the next thing, probably the next two oils you should keep is olive oil for like Italian cooking. Yeah. Cool. All right, so I'm giving this one more flip. And again, keeping the eye on the temperature, we're circling right around 350, so that's a good place for us to be. Isn't EV, Sean, I'm not sure what EVOO is. Yeah, yes. Spare parts, yeah, thank you. That's what we did. So we did a 3-part breading. So it was first coated in regular AP flour, and then we coated it in an egg wash, and then finally in some panko breadcrumb. Probably the most iconic thing to chicken katsu is that panko breadcrumb. So there's our second piece. So real quick, I noticed a couple things. One thing that in particular just started happening is we have these little flakes of black coming off. It just started happening, so it's okay if it just starts happening because we could stop it in its tracks at this point. But what that's a sign of is there's residual panko breadcrumb that's building up in our fryer. And the more that stuff builds up, the more it will start sticking to the next thing that you fry. So what we should be doing, I haven't been super diligent about it, but what you should do is every time that you pull a piece of chicken out, get yourself a sieve or a strainer, and then start fishing out the remaining panko breadcrumb that leaves behind. Because what happens is it's going to start burning, and then once it starts burning, it's going to start sticking to the next thing that you fry, which is actually what just started happening. So the next thing before I do my next 2 pieces of fried chicken is we're going to fish that stuff out. Otherwise, we're going to have black spots in our next piece of chicken. So before I add my next piece of fried chicken, I'm going back over to the stove, and then what we're going to do is fish all of this remnant stuff out. So super, super important. As best as you can, try and get all of this stuff remaining out of here. Because what's going to happen is the more that you leave this stuff behind, so you can even see there's a little bit of black stuff in my strainer right here. All of that stuff is going to start coming off in your fry, and then you're going to end up with black stuff stuck to your next piece of chicken katsu. So if you catch it early, you'll generally be okay. If I were to continue with all this stuff laying behind, though, what we should have done is probably just cleaned after every use, but I was being lazy. Yeah. Organic range. Will I reuse the oil? Yeah. Where are we right now? 360 is too hot. Yeah, will I reuse the oil? Yeah, I generally get maybe 4 or 5 uses out of the oil. So this is, I think, the second run on this oil, so I'll probably get another 2 or 3 runs out of it. Kind of depends on what you're frying. The first thing that I fried was just a little bit of shallots. It was a very, very brief fry, so I think I'll probably get at least another 4 or 5 fries out of it. But once it starts getting really, really dark, it's pretty much done. So eventually, the more that you fry, the darker it will get, especially depending on what you're frying too. All right. Yeah. Organic range, yeah, good question. How do I dispose of it? That's always, yeah, lots of people ask about how disposing of the fryer oil. It's really tricky. The only real answer is that it has to get to a recycling plant at some point. So what I usually do is I get as many uses out of it as I can. So the first thing that I do every time that I reuse it is first you let it cool down, and then I pass it through a cold brew coffee filter, and that gets all of that particulate matter out. It'll also help just like clean the oil, and that will stretch it for at least 3 or 4 times. If you're depending on what you're frying, you might even stretch it for like a 5th time. But then after that, I leave it in my garage, and then I recycle it with my motor oil. So if you have a car and you're already changing your own oil, that you probably have somewhere that's piling up anyway. So for me personally, it's already piling up somewhere, and then I just make a trip to the recycling plant every 6 months or so. No spider, yeah. That's probably on my to-do list. I got to pick up a spider. All right. Yeah, Skelly, good question. That's like one of the like quintessential things that you get in like Asian cooking is a spider, which is essentially a sieve or like a fine mesh strainer, but with a handle. It's on my to-do list. I just don't have one. I had one and then it broke. So cool. All right, so once again, I'm keeping a close eye on my fryer temperature. We're at just past 350, and then I'm going to give this a flip. Oh, extra virgin of olive oil. I don't know why I didn't put that together. Yeah. Yeah, Sean, good question. Extra virgin olive oil, not great for frying. For a couple of reasons, but the main reason you don't want to fry in extra virgin olive oil is because it burns very early. So I'm not sure what the actual smoke point of olive oil is, but it's very, very low. So it will start smoking very quickly, and then you're going to taste the flavor of burnt olive oil. So it will like taste very burnt whenever you fry in it. But I've heard differing opinions on whether or not this is a myth. But definitely when I use olive oil, as far as I can tell, it splatters a lot harder too. So if you try and fry, like say an egg on very high heat in olive oil, it will spit really hard because it has such a low smoke point. So yeah, anything high heat, so canola oil, vegetable oil, peanut oil, any of those will work. Oh yeah, an actual spider. No, that's all right. Oh, there we go. So I'm putting the thermometer in. We want this in the deepest part of the fried chicken, so we don't want any misreads. Yeah, that's 160. If you're feeling adventurous, you could pull this shy of 160 too. I do that all the time, and it's generally fine. I haven't given myself food poisoning yet. But I generally don't go anywhere below like 145. Anywhere below 145, you're in the range of you might give yourself food poisoning doing that. Sometimes I like wander around like 150 if I'm like if it's starting to look burnt and I don't want the chicken to be overcooked. But our target temperature should always be 165 to make sure we don't give ourselves food poisoning. Yeah. An actual spider, yeah, no. Cool. All right. Oops, wrong camera. So my last piece of fried chicken is back in the fryer. Once that's done, we're ready to start plating stuff up. Yeah, Gossip Girl, yeah. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST. Today we're cooking a Japanese fried chicken dish called chicken katsu. If you're more familiar with fried chicken or fried food in Japanese cuisine, probably the thing that's more familiar is tonkatsu, which is the same thing but using a pork cutlet. Today we're using chicken breast, mainly because I have chicken breast, but also because I think it's going to be a little bit more tender, and definitely my preference when I eat chicken katsu or katsu. So if you're looking for the recipe for this, pretty much everything that I cook on stream has a recipe that goes with it. So essentially what we're doing on these streams is cooking my way through all of the things that I have produced recipes for. So this particular chicken katsu was a recipe that came out over on my YouTube channel last Friday, so a couple of days ago. So if you haven't checked that stuff out yet, lots of fun stuff going on over there. Those are out every Friday. Yeah. Pale comfort, yeah. 120 is real dangerous. Depending on, like, I guess, like, you could wander that low if you know where the chicken came from. So if you, especially if you slaughter it yourself, for example, but also, like, if you know for sure that it does not have E. coli, then you're probably okay. I feel the same way about, like, doing medium rare ground hamburgers. So like a medium rare hamburger, the only time that I ever order medium rare or get a medium rare hamburger is if I do it myself. And some people even say is the only time that you should do that is if you ground the meat yourself. But yeah, 120 is dangerously low, for sure. RKK6, yeah. So the first thing that we coat it in is AP flour. So we start with AP flour and then a quick egg wash, and then the last thing is that panko breadcrumb. Cool. All right, that's almost there. We're gonna give that another like minute or two, and that should be ready to go. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Super fun. Yeah. Hello to everyone watching over on Reddit too. I know lots of folks have already hopped over onto YouTube, but if you haven't yet, lots of fun stuff going over on the YouTube channel. I know lots of people are watching over on YouTube already too, so. All right, that's looking pretty good. Ham rub, yeah, AP. So AP flour referring to all-purpose flour. So the like colloquial term would just be like the regular bench flour. It's the flour that you would generally have in your house. It would be the one flour that your mom probably has, that one flour. The only reason that you give the AP designation is because there's a lot of other kinds of flour that you might use, mostly for making bread. So you like durum flour, bread flour, wheat flour, all of these other things like gluten-free flour, rice flour, stuff like that. But AP flour is referring to like standard, regular old, like plain flour. All right. Let's make sure that that's the right temperature. This might be on the, oh, no, there it goes. There we go. All right, that should do it. All right, so real quick before we clean out the fryer, I can take a look or show you what happens when you get lazy. So on this very last piece of fried chicken, I think you could see it. You zoom in real close. Yeah, I think you can kind of see. So that you'll notice there's like a couple of little flecks of black spots. That's coming from when you don't clean the fryer oil out. So I got lazy and I just didn't feel like cleaning the fryer oil again. That's why it's so important to clean out that remaining debris, because if you leave that stuff behind, eventually it's going to start burning. Not the end of the world. It just means that there's a little bit of flex and like weird stuff that's going behind. They're going to leave behind on your fried chicken. I'm very carefully pouring out my fryer oil. And I mean very carefully. Fryer oil is very dangerous. And, alright. Alright, so next up I'm going to rinse out my wok here. We don't want any of this stuff staying behind. And then we're going to reheat and do our garlic and ginger. Yes. Cool. Yeah. So the very last thing that we need to finish up before we start plating is our tonkatsu sauce or our katsu sauce. So if you were watching earlier, the first thing that we did was our katsu sauce. This is our katsu sauce. It's a combination. You could even eat this katsu sauce right now and it would be really tasty. It's a combination of a couple things. Mainly is dark soy sauce, oyster sauce, and mirin, and ketchup too. Super, super important. The last thing that I like doing though when I do a homemade katsu sauce is blooming out our aromatics. So we have some garlic and ginger, and then we're going to infuse that into our katsu sauce, and that's going to give us this nice aromatic katsu sauce. Divided donut, yeah, are we using cabbage? Cabbage, yeah, the cabbage is going to come up very, very last. This is the last couple of things that we haven't done yet. So these are our garnishes. So this is our lemon wedge, green onions, and this is going to be our cabbage, which is going to be the very last thing. So super, super important. The cabbage, you could think of this cabbage as sort of like, so we have our katsu. Right now our chicken katsu is sitting on a dryer rack. So it's sitting on a slotted rack. And that's preventing like the residual oil from like building up and turning the chicken soggy. When we plate it, there's obviously not going to be a dryer rack. So super, super important. What we're going to do is lay down that cabbage first, and it's going to do the same thing that that dryer rack is doing, which is essentially keeping it from like turning really, really soggy on the plate, which will absolutely happen if you're not careful. Cool. So I'm adding, this is going to be a really small amount of oil here. This is probably no more than 2 tablespoons. This needs to be a very small amount of oil because all of the oil that's in your wok is going to end up in your sauce, which means that if you add too much, it will break, and then you're going to have a layer of oil on your katsu sauce, which is not attractive. Oh yeah. All right, so I'm adding, this is my ginger and my garlic. And then we're just going to give this a really quick bloom. This will probably take maybe 10 seconds, 10-15 seconds. At this point, I like to say use your nose here. When you start smelling ginger and garlic, that's when you know you're just about there. And I'm going to do it. All right. So that's my katsu or garlic and ginger going into my sauce. And then we're gonna stir this to combine. And what's gonna happen is, since we just bloomed out all of the aromatics in our garlic and ginger, that's gonna give quite a bit of nice like fragrance to our sauce. Yeah, that's really good. Ooh, yeah, that's really good. Yeah, Insomniac. Yeah, thank you. Cool. Thank you for checking out the recipes. Yeah, if you haven't checked out the YouTube channel yet or all of the recipes over on YouTube, definitely check that stuff out. We're working our way to 2,700 subs by the end of the month. We might have hit it already. That channel was already pretty close to 2,700 when I started the stream, so we might have hit it. If we haven't hit it yet, definitely hop over and subscribe and help us hit that subscriber goal. Only if you're interested. Please don't subscribe if you're not interested. I don't know why people do that. Cool. So let's start cutting into this. So I'm going to go backwards. So we're going with the piece of chicken that's cooled down the most. And we're going to cut these into strips. Now what we ideally want are like the thinnest piece of strips that you can. But I also will say is that it is pretty difficult to cut chicken katsu because that panko breadcrumb is really, really delicate. So I try and go as thick as possible, and that usually doesn't end up being very thin. Do it. Yeah. So you'll notice there are 3 extra leftover katsu or chicken fillets. I'm setting these aside, and what we're going to do is use this in a recipe this weekend for chicken katsudon, or tonkatsudon. Oh yeah, cool. You're gonna make it with your grandma. Ooh, cool. That's a lot of pressure. Grandma approval is tough. Alright, so I'm adding my cabbage to the plate first, and we want to do this quickly while the chicken is still hot. Otherwise it's going to start getting soggy. And very, very important is that chicken needs to stay on top of the cabbage so that it doesn't get soggy. You can even see it during that time where I left the chicken. There's all of this oil and residual moisture. Part of that's oil, also part of that is the chicken sort of like shedding off some of its like condensation. But all of that is going to turn the chicken soggy. So the longer that you wait and the longer that you leave it on a flat surface like that, the more sog that you're going to get, and then you're going to end up with very, very soggy fried chicken. All right, next up is some plain white rice. Now, super, super important if you've ever tried to get that nice like round ball of rice that you like. It's like kind of iconic to most restaurants. They do it with ice cream scoopers. But in order to get that shape, your hands have to be wet. So you'll notice that my hands are very wet right now. They're very, very damp. In order to keep that rice from sticking to my hands, they have to be wet. Otherwise, you will have very, very sticky rice stuck to your hand. Restaurants, I think they normally would do that with ice cream scoop, though. Next up is our pickled daikon. I mentioned this earlier. This was one of the very first things that we chopped. But if you've never had pickled daikon, they kind of remind me of like a bread and butter pickle, where it's technically pickled, but it's more sweet than pickled to me when I taste it. I'm garnishing with my green onions, and then finishing this off with our katsu sauce, which, where did I put that? Ah. All right, let's give this a taste. Yeah. That's really good. Super, super crispy. But honestly, like, the showstopper is the katsu sauce. If you've never made your own katsu sauce, you are missing out real hard. I'm finishing with my rice with a tiny bit of furikake. That's definitely optional, but if you've never had furikake rice, it's my favorite thing ever. Furikake is a dried seaweed that has a combination of toasted sesame seed and a couple other things. I forget what else is in it. Yeah. The plate looks like a boiled egg. Yeah. I've heard lots of people have been confused by the plate design. So I've learned recently that White plates look really, really good on camera, but colored plates, they don't. But I'm also like a real sucker for stoneware, so I love these plates. But I probably need to go invest in some large white plates, for sure. Lots of people ask if there's sauce on the plate already because it looks like there's ketchup on it already, or something. Oh, Hermina, yeah, you love watching on YouTube for the landscape view. Yeah, lots of people say that it's like a little bit easier to watch, especially on like desktop. It's also like wider, and there's also nicer cameras on it too. So cool. Sean, thank you. Yeah, that's like one of the best parts about like a lot of wok cooking, is that it kind of just looks like nothing until you finish it. It just looks like a bunch of random junk. RKK6, yeah, you can definitely, so I mentioned this earlier too, you can definitely do it with chicken thigh, and it will probably taste fine. It will probably come out fine. It won't look right, and that's mainly because the shape of a chicken thigh is very, very different from like this profile. And this profile and like the shape of this chicken katsu is like, it's like a really iconic part of the dish. And it very specifically comes from a piece of chicken breast that has been filleted open. So you could do it, and if you don't care about how it looks, which you shouldn't care that much about how it looks, you can totally use chicken thigh and it will taste fine. But if you're trying to get the correct presentation, it comes from a chicken breast cut open. You could really use any kind of meat you want. You can also do it with a pork chop, or like a filleted pork chop, or pork chop cutlet, excuse me. And it will do the same thing, and that's what you would call tonkatsu, which is the same thing but using pork chop. Yeah. Cool. Stardust, what is a wok? Good question. So that's a very valid question. So this is our wok. It looks probably pretty dramatically different from most saute pans that you've probably seen. Probably the most important thing about it is that it's probably much, much larger. And it's very, very useful because it has for a couple of reasons, but mainly because it has very, very high walls. And it's also made of a material that's like, has very, very high heat properties to it. So it's made out of carbon steel. And probably the other more important thing about a wok that's different from a standard saute pan or a stir-fry pan is that it doesn't have a bottom to it. So you'll notice that the bottom, most frying pans would have a heavy bottom here, which is going to be very important for heat conduction. So that heavy bottom heats up, and then that's the thing that you're cooking on essentially is that heavy bottom. A wok, like this one, it does not have a bottom. So that means a couple of things. The first thing it means is that it gets really, really hot really, really fast. That also means that it cools down really, really fast too, so we have to cook in it differently, which is why wok frying looks very, very different from most other types of cooking, because you have to navigate the way that heat behaves in a wok very, very differently. So, good question though. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that. What is a wok? What kind of wok? Yeah, it's made out of carbon steel, for sure. Cool. Yeah. Cool. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I think I got everyone's questions. I know I probably missed some questions, so if I missed anything, feel free and repeat yourself. Super exciting pretty sure we hit top broadcast. I saw we had like 5,000-6,000 watchers at one point, so that's cool. If you haven't checked out the YouTube channel yet, definitely go and check that stuff out. New recipes, those are coming every Friday, and there's also a schedule of the live streams that all lives over there. So lots of fun stuff going on over there. We're working our way to 2,700 subscribers by the end of the month. We're pretty much already there. I think like 20 subs short of that right now. So if you want to help us hit the subscriber goal, though, definitely hop over and check that stuff out. Those recipes, they're coming out every Friday. So this coming Friday is going to be a recipe for beef chow fun. That's coming up this Friday, which I think Scott recommended that or requested that. Someone requested it. I forget who requested it now. But yeah, if you also haven't checked out the YouTube channel, that's also where I take requests. So if there's something that you want to see me cook, there's usually polls that come up over on the YouTube channel community tab a lot. So last poll that we did was for a couple of different things, but people voted in favor of a bibimbap, which is actually, I filmed that yesterday, so that's coming up probably in a couple weeks as soon as I finish editing. So that's going to be super, super fun. Lots of fun other content. That's where the schedule of live streams live, and where all of the recipes live too. So if you haven't checked those recipes out, there's lots of fun stuff going on over there. We have a couple of series that are in progress. My favorite one is the Chinese American Hack series, where we find like taking apart like the really Americanized cuisine that you find in American Chinese food, like Panda Express, PF Chang's, stuff like that. Kind of taking a look at what it would happen if we would try to reproduce those dishes in the lens of like traditional and like classic Chinese cooking, which is always super interesting because a lot of those dishes are not Chinese, they're really just American food. So really interesting to try and like recreate General Tso's chicken, but using things that actually come from traditional Chinese cooking, because then you get this dish that actually tastes like traditional Chinese food, but it is very Americanized, because General Tso's chicken is basically American fried chicken. So stuff like that all lives over on my YouTube channel. So if you haven't checked that out yet, definitely hop over. When do we stream? Yeah, Stardust Shelby, yeah, good question. We're streaming every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST. Sometimes I stream on Wednesdays, but not super consistently these days. The other thing, actually, this is a new development that we've been meaning to announce this, but I haven't yet, is I recently partnered with Chef, chefshef.com, which is local to the Bay Area, but if you happen to live in the San Francisco Bay Area, you can order the food that I cook on these streams. So you can order it and we'll deliver to you, just like caviar. So if you've ever like watched these streams and wanted to order it and you happen to live in the area, you can order that stuff. So I will link all of those things as soon as I remember to do that. So, cool. Yeah, the ring above the stove, yeah. Yeah, good question. Yeah, that's the wok ring. So the wok ring is super important. I only use my wok ring for deep frying. So you can take a look. Here's my wok ring. It keeps the wok, so it does a couple of things. The main thing that it does is that it keeps the wok steady. So this is super important if you have a round bottom wok, because without it, it just sort of rolls around like this, which is good and bad. I don't like using the wok ring when I'm sauteing or stir frying, because I like to have a little bit more mobility with it, and the wok ring kind of like locks things in place. You'll notice that it's still wobbling. The only time that I really use it is when I'm deep frying, because we really want to make sure that when the wok is full of oil, that it's not rolling around, because we don't want to start splashing hot oil everywhere, which is really dangerous. So. Yeah, good point though, definitely. Cool. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Oh, the last thing I'll mention is lots of people have been looking for the music. If you haven't checked out the Woo Cooks Beats channel, that all lives over on YouTube and Spotify. Beats. There it is. So if you're looking for the beats, that's all over there. Woo Cooks Beats. And all of that stuff, actually you can look at all of that stuff over on my new website, which is woocancook.com. So, cool. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I'm going to eat. If you have any questions, feel free and repeat yourself. I know I probably missed something. So I'll see you soon. Bye.
Slow. Come over and start up a conversation with just me, and trust me, I'll give it a chance. So now take my hand, stop, and the man on the jukebox, and then we start to dance. And now I'm singing like, girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me. Well, come on now, follow my lead. I may be crazy, don't mind me. Say, boy, let's not talk too much. Grab on my waist and put that body on me. Well, come on now, follow my lead. Come on now, follow my lead. I'm in love with the shape of you. We push and pull like a magnet do. Although my heart is falling too. I'm in love with your body. Last night you were in my room. Now my bedsheets smell like you. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with your body. 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 Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the shape of you. When we can, we let the story begin. We're going out on our first date. You and me are thrifty, so go all you can eat. Fill up your bag and I fill up your plate. We talk for hours